let's welcome Chong from Twitter, who will be speaking about how the Android team at Twitter scales from 3-4 guys in the Android team to 100 developers.
Hi everyone, I'm Jan. I'm the engineering manager for Twitter for Android. I've been at Twitter for about 2.5 years, and during that time, one of the big things we did was completely transform how we did mobile development on both iOS and Android, although I will obviously talk about Android. We did it to scale, and I'm going to talk to you about what we did and some challenges we faced and how we got through them. But first, we'll go back in time to 2011. Oh, okay, is that better? Okay. So to set the scene, Google Plus just launched, Amazon launches the Kindle Fire, iPhone and iPad dominate the mobile market, and Apple's just released Siri. In Android, they've just released a new OS version called Honeycomb. It's totally new to us. And this is Twitter for Android in 2011. So version 2.1. It's doing okay. Small, steadily growing user base. The rest of Twitter, however, the majority of everyone, executives, developers at Twitter, work on Twitter.com. So Twitter.com 2011. Most of Twitter's growth as a service has come through the web, and so that's what the entire company thinks about, the web. Inside Twitter, we have a tiny mobile team, a handful of people for both iOS and Android, and like Silicon Valley, outside of the Googleplex, Twitter's internal demographics are a little skewed towards the iPhone. There's probably like 9 iPhone users to every single Android user. And the user numbers also bear them out. At this point, Android's user base, Twitter for Android's user base, actually trails behind Twitter for BlackBerry. In 2011, Twitter for Android's development is handled entirely by 3 developers, 1 designer and 1 product manager. The designer and the product manager are shared with iOS. And these sets of 5 people dictate everything about Twitter for Android. What features get released, when they get released, and what the features look like when they get released. For the most part, at that point in time, we released every 8 to 12 weeks, so 4 major releases a year, not counting hotfixes. However, that's all going to change, so woo, forward in time. 2014, smartwatches, Amazon selling a phone, Apple's making phablets. The world's changed a little bit in 2 years. 3 more releases of Android, ice cream sandwich, Jelly Bean, Kit Kat. I should update that picture. Android slides have taken off, sales have taken off. They dominate the global market share. 84%, I think, of global market sales by volume, by device volume are Android. At Twitter, 80% of our users on Jelly Bean or above. So a huge, huge change from 2011. And Honeycomb, Google doesn't even track that on their distribution API, and neither do we. Okay, here at Twitter, new logo, new bird. Twitter for Android 2014 looks a little bit different, and Android users are booming. They are our single biggest growth area at Twitter. Here's what development looks like. We have a lot more people contributing to Twitter for Android codebase. On top of that, we release a new version of Twitter for Android to our users every single week. So that transition wasn't easy. It took us 1.5 years to get from 3 developers to 12. Then we put our foot on the gas pedal, and we went from 12 to the dozens and dozens, probably about like a 70, I think, total, 100 total pool in the company that now contribute, and we did that in a space of 9 months. So during that safe period of time, like I said, monthly cadence and then a weekly cadence for releases. So let me talk about some challenges for doing this internal to Twitter. First of all, Twitter had what I call web brain. So everyone thought of things in terms of the web. Just their approach to features development, their approach to quality, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the product teams at Twitter, so Twitter's divided into a bunch of product teams that own different areas, like the home timeline, direct messages, composing, media, different parts of the experience. They're completely dominated by web developers initially, and they fully embraced the concept of just ship it. So they would race to get new features in front of users as fast as they could, and it was kind of okay if they took a little bit of collateral damage. So Twitter.com, this was fine. An inexperienced developer could do fairly substantial amounts of functionality without really taking down the website. Now, the website went down for other reasons, but it wasn't because of them. As one web developer turned Android developer said to me, on the web, bugs just aren't such a big deal. I mean, if a couple hundred users see it for 5 minutes, that's okay. Just deploy again. We'll be fine, right? Not exactly how it works on mobile. So inexperienced developers trying to implement large chunks of new functionality without fully understanding how things are held in memory, dependency states for variables, the fragment lifecycle. You get a lot of that. It's probably the understatement of the year to say that's a bad user experience. Crashes cause people to uninstall the application. At Twitter, we also did an analysis to see what people did. We tracked level of engagement after people had experienced a crash on our platform. For the month after a person experiences a crash, their engagement with Twitter along the axis we measure is actually significantly depressed for an entire month. So no, we want to rein that in, less shipping it and more testing it. Clients also have much longer lives, much, much longer. Who's heard of an old web client that lives out on the web? There are roughly 60 different versions of Twitter for Android in the wild that have over 1,000 users. So if you publish a bad build that has bugs in it, it stays out there a lot longer. And that has implications for things like API design. If you publish an API that goes out in a mobile client, you better be prepared to support it for a pretty long time. Because if you remove that API, you're going to break functionality in that app. Can't we just upgrade all of the clients with this bug fix? We heard this question a lot from all over the organization. The first time someone said it to me, I was like, are you stupid? No. And then a lot of much smarter people said it to me, and then I felt bad, because that was a really mean thing to say. But it really made me realize the magnitude of the thinking change that needed to happen within the organization to basically stop people from asking this question. So the answer from the obvious side, from the mobile side, is so obvious, right? It's a no. Users decide when to upgrade. It literally lies in the hands of your users to decide when to upgrade. And not only that, auto-update helps a bit, but you don't actually control the distribution curve. That's thanks to Google CDN, right? So this is the 2-week upgrade curve from a version of Twitter for Android from 2013. So this is the percentage of daily active users that have gone into the newly released build every single day since release. These have been pretty reliable for us. The upgrade curve is pretty consistent when you don't ask for permission. 50% of our daily active users move within 3 days. It takes 14 days for about 75% for most of our user base to move on to a new release. iOS is faster. We don't know why. 90% of their users move within 3 days. We think, I don't know, training affordances, we're not sure. If you ask for permission, that's a huge, huge depression on the curve. We did it, I think, 2 weeks ago on version 5.24. Your auto upgrade becomes manual. We've shown that it depresses the upgrade rate for about a month and a half. So we try not to do that. And finally, as I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with, a somewhat immature developed environment, especially compared to the web, right? The emulator screen starts up very slow. Genymotion is an excellent, excellent substitute emulator. The idea is rough. Android Studio is in beta. They keep breaking our custom plugin every time they release. The testing infrastructure is incredibly immature compared to the capabilities available on the web. The API doesn't really lend itself to mocking. The fragmentation of screen sizes, the hardware, and manufacturer customizations just add a huge degree of complexity to the development situation. So, I mean, another kind of obvious, I'm going to say, cultural point at Twitter. When I joined, the first thing I did was start buying Android phones. I couldn't even get that approved in the budget, because they just were like, use the emulator. And you're like, no, not using the emulator. We're using devices. Okay. So we had to go mobile. We had to get to mobile brain. So Twitter recognized this very early on, probably around 2011, 2012. They had a stated mobile-first strategy internally. So it said every single feature has to ship first on mobile, or at least concurrently with the web. That was what we said we'd do. In reality, we had 5 mobile developers and 12 product teams with 3 initiatives each. That just wasn't going to happen unless we made some changes to how we did development. And finally, even when we did switch mobile, most people were on iPhone. So the designs you'd get for Android would be completely inappropriate. So we had to shift from iPhone, mobile to web to mobile, but also really to Android. Okay, our second major cultural challenge, which I'm only going to touch on here, is around experimentation. So A/B testing was hugely popular. It was fundamental to how product development was done on the web. They would kind of write multiple versions, show it to users, and then look at the analytics to see which one was better, and then flip that one on. At mobile, when they came to us and said, we want to do A/B testing, we were like, are you crazy? You want us to write 2 versions of every feature that you told me you needed last week, right? And then you're just not going to ship one after a week of watching what it does on the web. We were like, that's insane. And from the website, they were like, So you just guess like what feature you think is going to be good, and you put it out there, and you kind of watch the user numbers, and then you kind of are like, oh yay, good job us. So they thought that was insane, especially the quarterly releases, because they wanted to look at what our users were doing and use that and learn from that. So that was kind of a big fight, really, internally. So okay, here's what we did about it. Here's how we kind of like got past WebBrain. Well, first thing we did was buy a lot of phones. Twitter employees were already on mobile, they were on iPhones, but they needed to be on Android phones. So we focused on getting key players onto Android. Engineering managers, product managers, executives, designers. This is actually all the phones I could summon in 2 minutes that were just like around my desk. Weren't so worried about the developers, they needed a device to develop anyway. The best conversion I found, I don't know if this is a problem so much here, but in Silicon Valley it was huge, getting people to even just try Android. We first tried buying like top of the line Android phones. At that time it would be like the S3 and the HTC One X, and like people gave that back to me within 3 days. They were like, I just can't use this. So the thing that we ended up using is just pure unvarnished like Google experience, Google Android experience. So even though it was like a mid-level phone, we bought a lot of Nexuses. Nexus 4s, Nexus 5, Motorola X's, those we gave out like candy to everyone within the organization. That worked pretty well. So most people kind of use Android in the office and then an iPhone at home because they need to support both platforms. The second thing we did, we sent everyone to class because we needed a lot more developers with Android capability. So prior to 2013, we had people kind of like the master apprentice style, where like you'd come and you didn't know Android and you'd be next to the senior Android developer who would be kind of mean to you until you figured out what you were doing. That took a really, really long time. So what we did was we worked with a company called Maracana, and we hosted a whole set, I think like 4 or 5 sessions of 1-week Android training sessions. And the idea was not to get everyone, like at the end of a week, you're not an Android developer. Like, you can call yourself that, but like you're not really working at full speed. But the idea is to speed things up, cover all the newbie material, reduce the burden on our existing team. So no more, wait, what's an activity? Right, like that's handled by the class. We also actually encouraged everyone to take it in the company, even if you weren't going to primarily work on Android. And that's to really help people understand the platform. And so that gives people to move out, like, why do we have to support landscape mode, right? That was the question again. And then my personal favorite, how many screen sizes does Android actually have? And you're like, go to class. Okay. We ended up making a 1-day like taste of Android version for product managers and executives to really just help them learn. Like for device budget, I was arguing really with our VP of engineering about that, and then he took the class, and literally they just sat there and watched the emulator screen start, and after that my device budget was approved, so that worked very well. Okay. And then we encourage everyone in the company to get their hands dirty via stickers. People will do a lot for a sticker. So we had a policy where anyone who made a commit to our code base would get a Twitter for Android contributor sticker. And at the same time, we maintained a really small list of like starter bugs in the application, usually like typos and like layout fixes. And we gave them a sticker if they really fixed it. And that kind of got people to get their hands dirty and really understand what it looked like from the ground up, but also made sure their toolchain was configured correctly, which is more of a challenge than you'd think. Okay, so speaking of toolchain, what do we have? Here's what we started with. We use Git. We always use Git. Gerrit for code reviews, and Jenkins for continuous integration. So we started with, ever since all of mobile did that at Android. 2013, we moved to Gradle to support increasing complexity off of Ant. And then we added Android Studio support, which we've been wrestling with ever since. All right, experimentation framework was the first major component that we built. It's not that complicated. We have the ability to, based on a call to an API and what values it returns, show different configurations of UX and then track what users are doing and send it back to us. Second, we wrapped, and now we're actually trying to unify those two, is a feature switch system, which is actually kind of critical to what we do. So we had so many people making commits, we had to let everyone commit, but keep them from killing both each other and our stability rate. So we have feature switches that allow the dynamic enabling or disabling of features. We can target by device, feature, manufacturer, OS version, any combination of that. And that lets us deal with bugs as much as possible without releasing a new version of Twitter for Android. So if we find that a new feature, for instance, doesn't work on a particular like Droid X, we can turn it off just for that feature, for that phone, or OS version, whatever configuration it is, until we fix the bug, and then we'll enable it for them. So this also lets different teams with different ship schedules be in master without holding each other back. Everyone just commits. If you're not ready to go, we turn off your feature right when we cut a production branch. we made it to make it as easy as possible for Android users at Twitter to dog food our internal build. That's a term from Microsoft, so use what you're developing instead of using a competitor's product or a production product. Twitter didn't have a super strong culture of that when we started. So we run a daily dog food build at Twitter, so every night we have a build of Twitter for Android straight off of the development tools. The builds install side by side. We have a capability to rename the package names so that you can have both builds, production, dog food, and then often developer builds on the phone. And you can either compare if we really broke something, you can still tweet. The dog food builds have special report a bug functionality built in. So on any screen, you can report a bug. It takes a screenshot, adds all your device information on there, and automatically creates a ticket in our bug tracking system. And we're very aggressive about pushing these apps onto our users, onto the internal employee base. Every single employee that comes to Twitter gets either the iOS or Android dog food build installed on their phone during new employee orientation. It's like the second hour they're at Twitter, there's a dog food build on their phone. And then we register for a broadcast connectivity change, I think it is. And every time you join our corporate network and there's a new build, we'll like push it to you and have a really annoying push notification until you install it. So we want everyone to be on the latest build. One of our most important tools, moving at this velocity, is Crashlytics. I can't recommend this product enough. It happens to be owned by Twitter. It's free. It's real-time crash reporting, so you can see what crashes affect users as they're happening. We have it in all of our builds, and we literally check it every single day to see what's happening there. With the wild number of network configurations, devices, and Twitter for Android in the world, what it lets us do, this is the detailed, but what it gives you is like all the crashes you have and then a ranking by severity. So how many people it affected, in this case 12 million, and this isn't non-fatal, but it happened 130 million times. So that the way you can ensure that you're addressing the highest priority crashes for your users first. And then once you actually have it, it gives you demographics. Like this is sort of like when this crash spiked. I'm pretty sure this is due to a backend change. So someone deployed a bad build on the backend and it caused this issue to spike up. You have demographics about what devices potentially and what Android OS version. As you can see, this is all on a particular Android version. And then it'll give you the call stack later down. So again, constantly monitoring. And finally, automation. At a 1-month release cycle, manual verification is challenging but doable. At a 1-week release cycle, it's insane. So people used to make these crazy heroic efforts to get our releases out the door, but at 1 week it became clear that wasn't heroic, it was like a bottleneck, right? So we had to design the system to make detection and repair of critical problems a routine, lightweight thing. One of the key tools here is automate it. So in general, if you can automate it, we try to automate it. A couple examples. Consistent enforcement. Like robots and computers are just better at saying like, no, you can't do that. Like the second we scaled the number of developers contributing to Android, we immediately got huge battles about style and code base. Anytime you have more than like 5 developers in a code base, they tell you how stupid it is that they have to move their curly brace at the end of the line or at the next line. It was kind of pointless and horrible. From a manager, you're like, what are you doing? Just write code. So finally we said, okay, we're going to pick a set of rules that we can enforce automatically using lint. Right? We add a commit hook and a lint check, and we just agreed that if you can automatically check for it, then yeah, okay, you have to conform to that style. But if you can't, it's totally optional at that point. And boom, we had stylistically consistent code, and then no more arguing. So, and then second, automation gives us a way to provide feedback back to the developers rapidly as possible. We run 3 different types of tests. Unit tests, these are run per commit when you commit. We actually use our homebrew dependency tracker to only run the set that we think is affected by your change for speed. We run functional tests every couple hours on every supported OS level. So these are basic, what we consider the most valuable MVP flows throughout the application, things that we would stop ship for if they were broken. So like tweeting, seeing photos on the tweet. And then we have a set of tests that we run nightly, things that just take either a long time or we don't get a lot of value out of running it per commit. I mean, we could if we wanted to. Things like upgrade tests, where you need to assign release build to ensure that you have compatible database schema, performance testing, network tests, and analytics verification. To do with that, we use a little bit of everything, although we're almost done with migration to Espresso. We initially used Robotium because of the API level support when we started this whole thing, but as we had more and more people come online, especially from the web background, they had a lot of trouble using Robotium well and writing it really well. So now that Espresso has come out, we actually almost entirely migrated to Espresso. And then there's a whole bunch of tasks that you just can't do using something that's in process. And for that, we use UIometer, like notifications, sharing, anything that originates in the OS outside of the application. Right now, we run everything on devices. Like we have kind of a mini device lab. It's been okay. We argue back and forth all the time about emulators and devices. I think we're going to start beefing up our emulator usage a bit. But that's where we are now. Okay, finally, let me talk really quickly about how we release. So as I said before, in 2013, we moved from quarterly releases to monthly releases following the release train model. So if you're not familiar with that model, the trains are like releases have come at preset times, they're regularly scheduled, and they leave the station on time. That's kind of the basic principle. The features that are ready when the train is ready, they go out the door. The ones that don't, wait and take the next train. So the idea is your release date is going to scope your feature set, in theory. Okay, here's how we broke down the month. The first 2 weeks are epic open feature development. Between weeks 2 and 3, we had a feature complete deadline. This is pretty standard. And after that, we only theoretically accepted bug fixes for a week, and they went to a bake phase. We tried not to do anything at all. And we used to coordinate our schedule with iOS. So right here is when they would submit to the App Store, and we'd both theoretically be in bake and start the whole thing over again. In theory, when you're in bake, your developers are already working on the next release primarily because you're not really changing anything. And then life is good, right? In practice, that was totally never the case. iOS would be done, Android would be frantically continue working for an additional week, and by the time we moved to the next release, Android would be behind by a week, and it was just horrible. So here's what, let's just give a more detailed view. Here's what really ended up happening. So this is your month, and this is your very beautiful broken down release schedule. And here's commits from people, right? So here's the feature complete deadline, and we have 10 different teams working at the same time. And you, in your head, when you design this, you're like, oh, everyone's going to commit here. It's going to be great. No, everyone commits 2 days before feature complete, right? And then they commit the day after feature complete because they beg your manager to say yes, you can merge. And so really 10 different features that were developed independently just all got merged in 3 days, right? So as you can imagine, the code base is super stable, at this point. I remember one time I opened up the app that built the dog food build that day, and pictures were just broken across the entire application. You just couldn't see them. You're like, oh, how did we miss that? That was awesome. So then you frantically fix bugs, right? Desperately trying to get everything to production level within 2 weeks, or in this case, a week and a half. So that was horrible. We kind of did it for 2 or 3 releases, and then we were like, we cannot do this anymore. All right, so weekly releases. We needed to make it cheaper to catch the next release train. So people would be motivated to do the right thing, right? At a monthly cadence, no one ever wanted to revert their feature, because if they missed that deadline by 1 day, they'd have to wait an entire month to get it out the door. So everyone was trying to jam everything in on that 1 day, right? So we needed to make it you wouldn't mind waiting. You needed to have it so that managers would kind of voluntarily be like, okay, you're right, it's not ready, I'll just wait, it's not too expensive. And then we had to spread the amount of change coming in over time, right? Ease the pain of integration, reduce bug fixing load. So here's what we do now. We have a 2-week staged release cycle. First week's active development, second week is critical bug fixing and bake. At the end of the first week, we cut a release branch, and the second week is extremely restricted. We basically try to accept no changes at all once that branch is cut. So active development goes to freeze very, very rapidly. So we expect the code to be merged to be super high quality. And if it's not, we either revert it or we feature switch it off. Basically, once you're in this branch, if we find anything wrong with your code, we almost certainly either revert or turn off. Here's what it looks. The process is staggered. So we have 2 releases in flight during any given week. One that's in active development and one that's in critical bug fixing and bake. Here's our branching strategy. We have master, always open for development. Anyone can merge at any time. Every Friday, immediately just cut a release branch. It's automated, or it's almost automated at this point. And then again, to merge into the release branch, you have to get the okay of the release team. And basically, usually the default answer is no. Here's what it looks like on an ongoing basis. So every week, right here. At a 1-week pace, our primary challenge became issue detection. So previously, we'd use internal dog food users, time, and some manual QA to find issues. We actually used UTest for a while to do outsourced outsourced test runs, but like they couldn't keep up with the 1 week pace. Basically, the stuff we were sending them, by the time they got us results, it was too late. Internally, Twitter's Android user population mirrors that of Silicon Valley. It's getting better. But we probably only had 200 Android users internally when I started, out of a total company population of about 2,000 to 3,000. So while iOS had all these bugs coming in from internal users, Android was getting nothing. I mean, basically, we were reporting our own bugs. So right then, Google announced the alpha beta channels. This has been a huge, huge lifesaver for us. We make huge use of this. We have 5,000 people in our alpha pool. We have a dedicated message board where they can post comments and questions, which we read every single one, although we don't always, it's not obvious that we read it. They get the latest builds of Twitter for Android. They get builds straight off of master. So people in our alpha pool are looking at the same bits that we're looking at internally. We have a daily build. They usually get twice a week, so at most it's 3-day delayed. And then second, our beta pool has about 15,000 people, and we're constantly growing this pool. It's, I think, actually open enrollment right now. They have a dedicated link for feedback in the application, and again, we read every single email. We don't always respond to them. They get weekly builds of Twitter for Android off of the release branch, and we try not to ship anything that hasn't gone to the beta pool before it hits end users. Although for confidentiality reasons, some features don't get enabled until they're in production release, mostly because they tend to end up on TechCrunch if we preview them in beta. So here's what the whole thing looks like. Release branch goes to beta. Alpha branch is constantly deploying to, master branch is always constantly deploying to alpha, and master is constantly in active development, and beta is constantly in freeze. Works really well for us. It's allowed us to move a lot faster, substantially reduced internal friction and stress, while still maintaining a high bar for application quality. So that's basically how we scaled Android development. Any questions? Yes. Oh, I think they want to use the mic, sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned the alpha and the beta release. Do you guys use a progressive rollout in the Play Store?
We don't bother, yeah. We've looked at it, but we don't end up doing it. We do have progressive rollout capability in our feature switch system, so we'll do it internally along the back end, either to verify that the feature is working correctly, or more likely for scale, so that we can cope with the scale on the back end.
Another one is funny one. You don't use Crashlytics internally to push your APK. You rely on.
Sorry?
You don't use Crashlytics beta to push your APK.
We're gonna move to Crashlytics beta, but we currently do not. We have a duct tape and like mirrors system that isn't broken yet. So. Questions? Yeah.
Hello. Can you speak a bit about how the teams are organized? I mean, do you have libraries? Do you have code reviews? How
Yes.
different developers work together? I mean,
Yeah.
I understand the switch system, but obviously there has to be something else.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. But so I own all the framework teams. That's like the Android core teams. So that's 3 teams, performance and stability, core frameworks, which build the underlying scaffolding, are kind of the most Android knowledgeable in the entire company, and handle a lot of the low-level stuff that we try to abstract away to make it easier for the feature developers. And we provide like basically an API for them that's a little easier to use, as well as a client UI team that would do things like, can I say this? I guess when we did the redesign for pure Android, that team handled that, right? So it's like design across the entire app, across the different product areas. And then we, like I said, about 10, it varies because they're reorging all the time, but I'd say like 10 to 15 different product teams that work inside the application. Some of them are more clearly owning a space, direct messages, owns the entire direct messaging system. Notifications is a little more vague there, and those are product teams that own their back-end service and their front end. So they'll have web, iOS, and Android, which is all the Twitter-owned and operated clients right now, on their team. Sometimes they have people do more than one role, but for the most part, they have dedicated resources for every single front-end platform that they support. And so that's kind of how they're organized. Internally, yes, we have a pretty hefty code review system. I don't think it's odd. I think it's kind of standard Garrett, right? Like everyone, your code has to have a +2 and a +1 in order to be committed. And we've just added a custom owner file set onto that so that we can declare certain parts of the code to be owned by people, so that if people make a change that's cross-cutting, you have to have a +1 from someone in the owner's file for each area. That's a relatively new change, though. It does mean that the system we kind of have worked out is each area sort of has different leads. There's probably about, I'd say, total 7 what you would consider Android senior leads within the company that are distributed among my team and the product teams, and they kind of end up being like the satellite teachers, if you will, for the larger community of developers.
Thanks.
Could you tell us a little bit about your feature switching? How does it work? How do you operate it? Do you base it on that data push? How is it related to the analytics and the A/B testing?
It's very similar, and actually they're trying to unify it because it's kind of dumb that we have 2 API calls when they're essentially doing the same thing. But again, it's not that magical, and it works. It's not. It sounds magical when you read about it on a slide like this, and then in reality, it like works like 80% of the time, and there's like 20% where people are like, oh, I didn't put that in a feature switch, and it went to users, and you're like, God damn it. And then there's like just cases that the system wasn't designed for well, like logged out users or anything like that. So it's not magical. It literally just does a call to an API in the back end that says, hey, these are enabled, these are not enabled. And then based on like a regex, it says like, oh, turn this on and turn this off. So there is a bit of a race condition on start, but that we're constantly trying to make better on that area. But it does it's pretty effective. Like when it's working, it works really well, right? Like that you can just be like, oh, that's not working, turn that off, and you see like a crash go away. Like that's magical.
Hello, thanks. You mentioned several in-house developments like plugins and build systems. Do you have a team dedicated to these, or are the development team responsible for their tools?
The development team was responsible for their tools. I think it's probably the single biggest staffing oversight that Twitter had going into mobile. There was just, again, probably the vestige of what I would call web brain is they didn't think at all about the tooling situation on mobile. They just assumed it was fine. We have a new team that we just formed about 2 weeks ago. This is how behind it was. It now reports to me. It handles mobile for iOS and Android. So yeah.
How do you quantify the quality of your app? I mean, now you have hundreds of developers. How can you be sure it is worth to have all this workforce?
It is always a challenge. When we first started opening, expanding the number of contributors, you could actually plot the stability plunge, frankly, on the application, because like, you just let in like 40 people that frankly don't really know what they're doing and are motivated to ship really fast, and you could literally see the crash rate fall. So the first target we tried to meet was stability. I mean, aside from code reviews where, you know, people are fairly rigorous about saying, like, that's the wrong pattern, you can't have that in, you have to write it this way. But our first benchmark was stability, and that's what we use Crashlytics to constantly say. So we have a constant target of crash-free users that we're hitting, and that's what we use every beta and alpha. The first thing we look at is how many crashes they're experiencing, and we have an entire system where we monitor it and then fan out like bug reports that are like, hey, you introduced a crash, and I'm going to revert your feature by the end of the day if you don't have a fix for it, right? So our primary target is stability. Second target that we're rolling out now, we're in the middle of doing, is performance along many different axes. We don't have battery life quite working yet, that's almost there, but like network usage, data usage is one big one that we're like almost, like we want to have kind of the same system that we have stability for these kind of like base metrics that affect, like I would call these almost like table stakes. They're so fundamental to the user experience, like we haven't even gotten to the higher level, like how the app plays well together. This is like not being a jerk because I'm on your phone. Right, like I want to be respectful of your data usage. I want to get like images down to you as fast as possible. I don't want to drain your battery, and I want to have a performant, you know, a certain FPS when we go through the application. So. We have a lot of users, and they hate anything you change. Like I think our biggest plunge was when we changed the bird. So we listen to our beta users, we listen to our alpha users, but that doesn't mean we're going to change everything you hate, because everyone hates something and everyone loves something else. I think one of the beauty of Twitter is that everyone uses it for different things, and then also when you're developing it, that's like the curse of Twitter, that's the case. My favorite, everyone rails lists. Yes, we know lists are not well supported within the application. It's not going to change anytime soon. Oh, that's recording. That was bad. And then like my favorite personal review was I used to read them, the Google Play Store review, and it was like, it was translated from Arabic, and it was Allah curse he who decided to update Twitter for Android. And I was like, that's me. Thanks. So, yeah. Anyone? Yes.
Hi. So I have two questions. The first one is more technical. So you mentioned unit tests. Do you run your unit test on Android devices, on a Dalvik VM, on a JVM, and from the IDE or the build tools?
We currently run them on device, and I don't think they're integrated into the IDE. I think we had that like kind of working at some point, and then it broke, and no one fixed it. So we didn't have a dedicated build tools team, developer tools team. We're currently in the process of migrating as much as possible onto emulators, because now that my team has owned the device lab for like 2 weeks, just like watching them, they have to go down there like every day and reboot a device because Samsung upgrade dialogues are like causing all the tests to fail, and it's ridiculous. So when we first started, we really wanted on device because we thought, okay, that's end to end, that's what the user's going to see. Let's go ahead and make that happen. And then now after having done that for 9 months, I have to say we're much more leaning towards like if we can have a consistent replicatable environment that the developers can use on, like you can replicate the test environment on your local machine easily and get feedback faster, I think that's going to be better for us in the long run, and then we'll do a second pass later with device testing instead. So I think we're going to optimize now for getting feedback faster to the developers.
Okay. And a quick second question. So you mentioned like 7, I guess, tech leads that are very knowledgeable about the environment. How do you or they manage their time and prevent? I guess like they know everything, so their time.
They don't know everything.
They know a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
And then how do they manage their time? It seems like
that's a huge challenge, and that's been one of the continual challenges for us to get people going without killing the people that were initially there. That's one of the big reasons we brought in these classes, because it's like we want to make sure that the people are knowledgeable, spend their time as usefully as possible. So to give you a magnitude of this, when you think, I think we have like 100 developers across the organization that contribute to Android. Probably, I think about 5 of them came in knowing Android. Like 5 of them came in having worked on Android before and like could sit down and just write you a mobile app at the speed and quality that you would expect. The other 95 were homebrew, right? Like people that we converted from the web, people that we hired that were interested in knowing Android but just didn't know Android or had like done maybe like a month of it at their previous company, right? So that's kind of the magnitude of the education problem we had, which is why we brought in classes, frankly, just to take care of as much as we could. What we found was if you have a senior developer who's worked on, doesn't matter really what platform, it takes them about 3 months to get them really up to speed. After 3 months of day-to-day working on Android, then I'll be like, hey, this is the feature we need to implement. They'll give me an estimate. I'm like, that sounds about right, and they'll actually execute on that schedule. Junior developers, it's like 6 to 9 months depending on the progress of the individual developer. So it's a tough problem. Now we're on the kind of other side of that now, like because it's been we did all this Q3 and Q4 of 2013. So since then, we've had everyone still working on Android. So now they probably have, even then, like the most junior person who started back then has about 9 months of experience. So now we're actually moving a lot faster.
Yeah. Hi. Do you actually use Twitter at all as part of your sort of build process, notifying you of problems or
like having it tweet to us?
That sort of thing, yeah.
No, because Twitter's public. Like even Twitter's we had, for testing purposes, we had a fake verified account briefly. It was like a cat account. It would tweet things about cats. And then we found out TechCrunch was following it, right? So like we had to so we had to be very careful about what information we use to public. So we don't have like dark internal Twitter or anything like that. We stick with old-fashioned emails and yeah, so.
Thank you. Is your group in charge both of design of Twitter application and also of the Twitter API that you are?
No, we're much bigger than that. The Twitter API is like a whole set of gosh, I don't know, like many, many teams. I think 10 to 20 separate teams, depending on which part of the API. So, yeah. Any other questions, or are we out of time? Okay.
Thank you to John.